This is the Kwacha Podcast. I'm Kayula, and today we are talking about money, dignity, and the silent crisis facing Zambia's civil servants. This is part 1 of episode 1 of the Kwacha Podcast. If you have been with us, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your messages asking, when is the next episode? Those keep us going. The Kwacha Podcast is produced by 2 civil servants with full-time jobs, running on conviction rather than a budget. Getting here has not been easy, but we are back. And we are back with exactly the kind of guest this conversation deserves. In fact, what followed was such a rich and important conversation that we made the decision to bring it to you in 2 parts, because some conversations are just too important to rush. Today we are looking at civil servant indebtedness, not as a personal finance problem, but as a macroeconomic crisis with consequences for national productivity, our local economy, and our financial sector. In this part, we tackle 3 critical questions. Just how big is this crisis? What is it costing us in lost national productivity? And what happens to our local economy when workers have nothing left in their pockets after payday? Joining us is an economist from the Economic Association of Zambia, an institution at the forefront of economic research and policy dialogue in our country. Mr. Robert Mokola Malasha is the National Treasurer of the Economic Association of Zambia. He is a chartered accountant, a development banker, and a seasoned financial expert with over 20 years of experience across both the private and public sectors. He sits on the board of the National Road Fund Agency, where he also chairs the Audit and Risk Management Committee. Welcome to the Kwacha Podcast, Mr. Malasha. This conversation is long overdue, and we are happy that you are here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kayula. My apologies. You know, Mungoni, so Mr. Kayula for really having me on your program, and for inviting the Economic Association of Zambia to actually engage in this very most important topic.
Thank you very much, sir. So straight into our discussions, we want to understand economists deal in data. And so when you look at what we know, which is that over 70% of audited civil servants carry active loans, with many spending more than half of their income on debt repayments. So at what point does this cross the line from just being a household problem to a systemic macroeconomic risk? And has Zambia already crossed that line?
First of all, thank you again for having me and for having us on this program. And the question that you raise is a very critical question. It's very fundamental. And we'll try as much as possible in the time that we have to try and see how we can dissect it. Yes, if you look at the audited civil servants, emoluments in terms of the loans and which sit on their pay slips, we are looking at the 70% indebtedness in terms of that pay slip exposure. Now, to come to your question, half of that goes towards debt repayment. And if we look at that, does that impact the household level, or how does it impact on the national crisis? First of all, I would draw your attention to the budget. If you look at the budget of the national budget, you understand that emoluments, just emoluments alone, is about within 10 to 20% of the budget. Okay. So now, if you're looking at our budget, say for instance, like the 2026 budget, if we put it in dollar terms, it was about 10.2 billion US dollars. Now, that 10.2 billion US dollars is about 1/3 of the GDP of the country. So we've got a 10.2 billion budget, national budget. At that point, because our GDP, gross domestic product, is about 30 to 33 billion US dollars. So meaning that budget represents 1/3 of our GDP. The total products and services that we make or produce as a country in a fiscal year. That is very important. That financial mapping is very important to the point I'm trying to raise. Because if 1/3 of the GDP accounts for a national budget, then 10 to 20% of the national budget accounts to staff emolument. So when you translate that, you find that that particular component, just staff, is about maybe 3 to 5% of the GDP. We are following each other on that. Yes. So if that being the case, we can do the numbers so that we can have accurate positions. But if we do the numbers, then it means that if the civil servant is borrowing, basically you're dealing with a 5% of the GDP. Just that segment alone.
Okay.
So when you say, does it affect household? Yes, it does. Because it accounts for 5% of the GDP.
Okay.
Does it affect the national cake? Yes, it does. So the behavior around the debt within the civil servant does have an impact on the national debt position. Now, debt in itself is not bad. That's why as an accountant, I'll tell you that, or come economist, I'll tell you that there's what you call bad debt and good debt. So now you need to segment. When you're looking at the debt for the civil servants, what are we talking about? Are we looking at the bad debt? Are we looking at debt in total? So you have to understand the behavior of that debt which sits on their pay slips. There are some civil servants, like perhaps yourself, you would have borrowed. And when I'm looking at the pay slip, it doesn't tell me the whole story. I need to understand, why did you borrow? Where are you taking the money? Are you reinvesting in some business enterprise somewhere? Or you're investing in some investment, government bonds, or whatever investment portfolio? Or are you just consuming? That behavior of that debt is very, very important as far as I'm concerned, for us to critically dissect and understand what the issue is, so that we clearly map what the crisis is. Because sometimes you could be prescribing medicine to somebody who's not even a patient. You are assuming, by virtue that they're shivering, that they've got malaria. Maybe it's just the jersey, they need a jersey to keep themselves warm. Are you getting the point? So, yes, there is a high indebtedness in terms of when you look at the pay slips of civil servants, but where is that money going to? I know quite a number of civil servants who have reinvested the money, but it's very important to dissect it so that there's understanding, so that when you get a policy position, you are actually prescribing to actually manage that policy position. There are civil servants who are distressed, financially distressed, and that is a very critical issue because it impacts on the attention somebody gives to work, productivity. As you know, there's now a policy as of March 16th, 2026, with a 24-hour economy. Okay, it talks about, economic growth, employment, and service delivery. So if you look at the service delivery in the civil service, if you and me are in there, and I'm financially distressed, definitely the level of attention to my work will go down.
Exactly.
That will impact on the productivity. And it would actually go to injure this same policy which government is projecting in terms of the 24-hour economy. So does it impact on the nation in terms of that? Yes, it does. Household, it will do. But the impact, what is the impact? Understanding of that then becomes very, very important.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. And I think that brings me to the next question on national productivity, which you have touched on. A financially stressed worker is by definition a less productive worker. So we are talking about teachers, nurses, police officers, the people who deliver the state's most essential services. What is your estimate of the real economic cost to Zambia of running a public sector where a significant portion of the workforce is mentally and emotionally consumed by debt anxiety every single working day?
Yeah. Oscar, there are two things there. There's what you call the qualitative, meaning it's more qualitative in terms of the impact, and there's something that you can actually measure the quantitative impact of that particular position. We can measure it in terms of money we should have lost, in terms of man hours. Somebody, of course, in the civil service is expected to work at least a maximum of 8 hours a day. Yeah, but if you are financially stressed and your mental position is such that it's impacting your output, even your well-being as an individual, definitely where can your the level at which you are giving your services to that particular segment of the government enterprise does go down. Okay, so if then you say, what is the impact in terms of service delivery?
Exactly.
The impact is huge because 8-hour shift, I'll just give you the common 8-hour shift, which is from 8 a.m. to about 5 p.m. or 17 hours if you like. I'll spend most of that time trying to negotiate with my creditors. Okay, how much they can give me in terms of restructuring my personal debt. I know the word restructuring is so common amongst your listeners. Restructuring my personal debt. And, negotiation can be very protracted and they can be very aggressive. Okay, so if it's aggressive to a point whereby my creditor even wants to come to my place of work, then that poses a bit of a challenge. You'll find that I'm not found in my office. I try to duck. I work from another station. So all that is money because, as I said, time is money. So if you can quantify all that absentia while being present, you can be present, but you can be absent by being you're present but absent for work. Basically, I'll be here. I'm working, but I'm not here. Okay. So how do you quantify the cost of that? So you look at each civil servant and you say, okay, this person is supposed to put in 8 hours of work every day for 5 days a week, which is 40 hours. If you talk about 4 weeks, that is then 160 hours.
Exactly.
Okay. So of that 160 hours, do these people put in the full shift? So then you say, okay, if say Mr. Ayuda, you gets 1,000 kwacha per month, we now divide that 1,000 kwacha by the 160 hours to actually get to know how much we pay you per hour. So if any one of those hours you are missing from work, that is the amount of cost it is impacting on the ministry and the government enterprise. Now, there are about 50,000 of you, and each one of you is missing 4 hours every week. So which is 4 hours times 4 times is about 16 hours. 16 hours of that amount, then you quantify the kind of financial impact on the whole government enterprise as a result of debt. Because you're trying to run away from your creditors. And your government ministry officers are very so sophisticated that you can actually duck someone. Someone cannot even find you if you really wanted to put it that way. I'm not saying that's what happens. I'm just trying to quantify the quantitative portion of it. Now, that is just the financial impact of absenteeism while present at the office. Okay? But there's the non-quantitative or qualitative, which means that service delivery. For instance,
quality of the service.
Absolutely. I would have wanted something from you. And I need that information for, say, for instance, let me deal with the elephant in the room, for the debt negotiation with the IMF. But because you are dealing with your creditor, personal creditor, not government creditor, not ministry creditor, but your personal creditor, that delivery of that service to me, which you owe me, has another government worker or civil servant, will be impacted because I will not get that input. And that input is so critical that I need to be at a negotiating table with that data or that information for me to effectively represent the government enterprise in that negotiation. But I will not be able to do that. I'll just be shooting in the dark because that critical information, which you were supposed to supply by me, by yourself, to me, is not there. But the meeting has to go on. So what then that means is that instead of being at optimum negotiation position for that particular facility, I'll be short one thing. And a negotiation is like a fight. We go there to win. Okay? Though people will say it's a win-win situation, but we go there to win. We've got our own agenda when we're negotiating. There's an expectation. So that expectation we have and our objectives for doing that negotiations will be impaired. And definitely, somebody will smell that there's blood in the water. If they've got other negotiator on the other side of the table, they'll smell there's blood in the water. These guys are ill-prepared, and they're moving. What happens? There'll be a huge financial impact on the whole nation because the negotiation to begin with was weak. Why was it weak? Because I expected some input from Mr. K. And why did Mr. K give me that input? Because he's dealing with his personal debt and he has to run away from his office. So future generations get to pay for that particular cost. Now, how do you measure that cost? The public goods, in terms of the public service which government enterprise renders to the citizen, will be impacted. Because instead of investing into public goods such as health, education, all these other intermediaries, creating an environment of sustainable economic development, we now have to channel that resource to repaying this multinational creditor. Why? Because the negotiation itself fell on its knees, because a critical member of staff in the citizenry had a personal issue to deal with. That becomes a huge challenge. Now, that is putting it a little bit simplistically, but this is why I would want to see you magnify it and see that how that personal debt can actually impact future generations of the whole country from that perspective. So you can quantify it and say, how much do we pay Mr. K per hour? This is how much we paid. He missed 16 hours of productive work in a month. Then we say we quantified. But how many of Mr. K's do we have in government? Then we'll multiply by that. Then we'll have a qualitative position and say, okay, we are losing about what? Maybe 2% of the budget in terms of idle time, which we can try to manage and blah. But that is idle time is resulting as part of the debt management at individual
level.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. Let me now move to another question. On this one has to do with domestic demand. When tens of thousands of civil servants surrender, let's say 40, 50, sometimes 100% of their salary to loan repayments before they can even buy a loaf of bread, what does that do to the small businesses? I'm talking about market traders and the local economy that depend on this, on the spending power of these workers. So are we seeing the debt crisis of civil servants quietly strangling Zambia's domestic economy from within?
That I would say that is a trick question, and I'll answer it in two ways. I would say yes and no. Let me start with a yes. It's much easier to answer with a yes. Yes, because the expectation is that when somebody is actually channeling out their monthly earnings towards debt servicing, well, in the range of, as you put it, 40%, 50, 100%, clearly it means the disposable income is not there. They cannot stretch themselves to a level whereby they can actually even procure their essential commodities or needs at household level. Meaning children cannot be paid for school, you can put clothes on the back of your children or your family, food, shelter, etc. That would be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so that would be my yes. There's an impact because now, instead of going to that SME or Kantemba, as you put it, they will not be able to engage with that to actually get a product or a service from those Kantembas because they don't have any disposable incomes. But we live in a real world. And this is why we are even discussing this debt crisis. If you were in debt or I was in debt, 100%, my entire earnings is going towards servicing debt. I will still find a way to get money to make sure that my child goes to school. There are clothes on the back that now there might be illegitimate or legitimate ways in which I do that. Let's assume that it's legitimate. Legitimate, meaning they are within the confines of the law. I'll come to you. I say, you've been my friend for so much. I'm expecting something. That's how we start this conversation. I'm expecting something. Just give me maybe 5,000. I will repay you. There will be a lot of other issues that you can do in that sense. But then what that is doing to you is that you're putting a stronger stronghold around your neck to try and meet you because you don't have any disposable income. So you're living from debt to debt to debt to debt. That becomes a huge, huge challenge. So in so doing, then how does that member of staff become very productive? They'll still continue engaging with the Kantemba at the corner of their road because they have to buy the tomatoes, they have to buy the relish, they have to buy the foodstuff. That continues as though everything is okay. But where that resource is coming from is not necessarily from the salary. I'm using my salary as a surety, which is already 100% in debt, so it's already taken. But if you are talking to me, no, Mr. Malasha works for, so obviously he can pay me back. You give me the money. But I, for one, I know exactly what kind of debt I mean. But that is now a huge challenge because even the level of my service within the ministry, within the civil service environment or ecosystem will be very low. So does it have an impact? I would say yes, because the disposable income is either very low or not there. Then I'll say no, because a household has to still survive. You still have to buy food for the children. They still have to go to school. So you have other means of how you're going to surviving. This is why now you have even a legitimate way of how people get these resources.
And the illegitimate
way. So I will not dwell on the illegitimate way. I'll dwell on legitimate. So that
now I would have loved you to also talk about the illegitimate.
Well, then you're looking at now issues of the Public Finance Management Act, which looks at how the financial behavior of a public officer is supposed to, behave. You have shortcuts. You have issues with procurement where people would want a cut. You have a lot of contracts being probably given a blind eye in terms of not having met the specs, but of course there's been an arrangement. Besides, there are a lot of ways in which there will be a lot of leakage, and that spells into corruption now. Because you're so highly exposed. There is no way it's almost like what the Bible says. It says, which among of you, if your child is sick, will give him a stone or go give her a stone to eat? You will try to find the fish. Now, how you find the fish is none of your business. But one thing is that the bottom line is I have to find the fish to feed my daughter or to feed my son. So now that becomes, it's almost like it's an inherent responsibility towards your family. So now, do we have to put our civil servants in harm's way in that sense? So that's a question. That's $1 million question.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us on this program.
Thank you very much, sir. It has been a pleasure. That brings us to the end of today's conversation, and what a conversation it has been. To our guest from the Economic Association of Zambia, thank you for lending your expertise and your voice to this critical national discussion. You have helped us see clearly that what civil servants are experiencing is not just personal misfortune. It is a macroeconomic wound that affects every Zambian. To our listeners, I thank you for coming back. We promise the wait between episodes will get shorter. Keep sharing, keep engaging, and keep holding institutions accountable. The Kwacha Podcast will keep showing up for you. Until next time, it's goodbye.